Hello, 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 hello. You. Now I got something to share with you. There is a big misconception about nihilism. And to some extent, we can get multiple perspectives on how you can look or think about nihilism and how it comes to relate to depression. But the concise things that I want to bring up within this video would be more that it's actually not really nihilism on oftentimes depression that actually comes to bring down a person to stop caring about anything. Nihilism is essentially a coping mechanism. It's when we find ourselves to be unable to make progress on activities that you find meaningful and actually fulfilling. The experience of failing at it is so painful that our natural coping mechanisms becomes actually to give up on the goal and the meaningfulness of it entirely. Nihilism is essentially a coping mechanism. It's not that things are being meaningless, but actually becoming depressed about some things is a short-term strategy of soothing the pain of failure, because we are unable to deal or have a proper conception of how we come to deal with obstacles and hindrances in the first place. What we have to keep in mind is that there won't be always simple solutions to any mood-related disorders or discomforts. But what I want to give you in this video is probably some insight, and let alone by being able to recognize it when it occurs, is oftentimes half the battle won. And despite even knowing it, we still have to deal with the other 50% that I want to provide you with some guidance. And I bet we kind of all not only known people who would excuse their goals, be it in smaller or larger scale levels, but we also would know it within ourselves if we actually come to pay attention to it. Now, for example, we would all know this one guy who would try to approach this one girl that they really like, and after they get rejected, they begin to talk down upon it by saying, "Oh yeah, she was just ugly anyways. I don't really care about her. She wouldn't be that nice of a partner to begin with." It's, as you see, it's not the girl that was the problem, and if she really was that unattractive and unimportant, you wouldn't be really bothering about going out your way, and second of all, you wouldn't even bother thinking so much about her. And in a similar way, a lot of people, at least what I came to discover within myself, come to give up on goals because they become meaningless. You kind of begin to tell yourselves, okay, why does it matter to pursue this goal if it won't have that big of an impact anyways? Why should I care about it? And this is also in a lot of ways how motivation comes to originate within us. Motivation is an emotion. It's a drive that not only affects the way you think or feel, but it's supposed to control the way we act. And this feeling is also responsible for a way of thinking. And even if it may be said that, okay, you shouldn't care so much about motivation, you should be this tough motherfucker who actually pulls through the shit and be super disciplined, be super hardworking. This form of hustle is still a form of motivation. It's still desire to push through a certain emotion because you know it will be gratifying in the first place. Emotion tends to conquer a way of thinking. If you begin to feel a certain way, we also begin to think a certain way. When you feel anxious, you begin to have anxious thoughts And when you have anxious thoughts and emotions, you begin to act like an anxious person. And this is nothing new to begin with, but the idea of treating our emotions or thinking and or behavior as something separate is not that productive to begin with. And you have to know, if you begin to feel like shit, will everything else will follow within your life. In the same way you would begin to feel bad, even if you push through it, you have to be realistic enough about it that you won't be always capable of tolerating and dealing with the stress. Now, I'm not saying this as a limiting belief that you won't be tough enough to get through things. What I'm saying is that even if you push through the stress to begin with, you will usually end up burning yourself out. If you avoid and push away the emotions that you don't want to deal with, they will usually return and end up being a lot stronger than you if you have dealt with them before in the first place. And third of all, it won't resolve the underlying issue by pushing away and rushing through all those things, by either excusing your thoughts or completely ignoring them. Now, it has multiple layers in that this problem can be approached. But the problem is not that we lack meaning, it's rather that we cannot stand meaninglessness in the first place. And the only thing that ever controls our perception of meaning would be our thinking ourselves. Yes, it will be our thinking that will determine what will be meaningful for us, what will be not meaningful for us. Everything which we consider as meaningful in life has a basis that's layered upon emotion, that's layered upon values, and these values have no objective origin. They are all subjective experiences, and therefore there is nothing which makes one value more true in the sense or less true, but your personal experience. But the problem of nihilism and apathy and everything that it tends to deal with is that by the twist and the change in emotion, it can also change your perception and things, even if you have this discipline to not give a damn about your emotions, you still won't be able to push through, because not only your emotions but your way of thinking, your goals and your overall direction of life will be determined by this haunting sense of nihilism that develops itself as a coping mechanism. Now, the way you can deal with it is actually by realizing that things are never meaningful in of themselves, but you are in a capacity of making things meaningful. Meaning is not so much something that happens to you, but as an individual, just as much you're capable of creating meaning on your own. You can make things still feel pleasurable and still make them feel good if you can actually focus on making it an enjoyable experience. There is this idea within cognitive behavioral therapy. In fact, there are multiple methods, but one of the methods will be the implementation of behavioral activation. Now, simply put, behavioral activation is a method that's used for people, for example, who struggle with depression and anxiety. And the point of this method is you try to figure out the activities that you enjoyed before you were actually being depressed. And still, even if you may not feel like it or think that you won't experience any fun with the behavior to begin with, you're still going to act upon this behavior. And by acting upon it, what can happen is that even despite you may feel depressed right now, you can still, by doing it for 20 or 15 minutes, you still can recreate those patterns where you began to feel the joy and fun that you have with this behavior in the first place. Now, the behavior that you found happiness to begin with can vary, but even if we may not be able to experience happiness right now, because we are being hard on an existential and almost philosophical levels, it's actually through the basics and primitive experiences of pleasure that we can actually reboot this normal experience of happiness that we had before. Because if you think about it, there wasn't really an origin of this experience of conceptual happiness, or what we would understand it in more abstract terms. The only real form of happiness in the sense that we get to understand in the beginning would be simply pleasures and simply joys that we would find within the present moment, not so much in the abstract sense of living a happy and fulfilled life. Fulfillment is, despite being vastly different from pleasure, is still from the basis from that it begins to build its foundation. The point of meaning and fulfillment is, you would, for example, find Viktor Frankl, the author of Man's Search for Meaning, talk about, is mostly a way of dealing with suffering. Suffering in as far that we want to make sense why we suffer, because by knowing the reason for it, we still have some hope that we can get away from it. And that is actually fixable to begin with. And without knowing how, what we usually end up being is we end up feeling desperate and we lose hope, and therefore we give up on acting, which further reinforces the cycle of depression and nihilism and meaninglessness. And this is not what we want to fall to. We never need meaning or fulfillment within our lives if we are happy to begin with. Only the people who are suffering and who are feeling bad will be the ones who will look for meaning or this higher purpose, because of their inability to experience pleasure and inability of dealing with the pain and pressure that they put upon their life.